The Hungry Club Forum. The Hungry Club Forum began as a secret initiative of the Butler Street YMCA in Atlanta. It was a place where sympathetic white politicians could meet out of the public eye with local black leaders who were excluded from many of the city's civic organizations. They sought to meet out of the public eye. Nicodemus knew about this reality, seeking to meet his Jesus out of the public eye in the shadow of darkness, knowing that it would be a risk, yet one that he was willing to take as he hungered for a deeper, more meaningful, liberated life. Back in May 10th, 1967, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. addressed this hungry club. He acknowledged the progress that had been made in civil rights, but he warned against the evils of poverty, racism, and militarism. He said these endangered further gains for Black Americans. Speaking prophetically almost 50 years ago, Dr. King declared, "Now I want to deal with the third evil that constitutes the dilemma of our nation and the world, and that is the evil of war." Somehow these three evils, he said, are tied together. The triple evils of racism, economic exploitation, and militarism. The great problem and the great challenge facing humankind today is to get rid of war. We have left ourselves as a nation morally and politically isolated in the world. We have greatly strengthened the forces of reaction in America and excited violence and hatred among our own people. We have diverted our attention from civil rights during a period of war. When a nation becomes obsessed with the guns of war, social programs inevitably suffer. He tells us people become insensitive to pain and agony in their own midst. We have left ourselves as a nation morally and politically isolated in the world. We have greatly strengthened the forces of reaction in America and excited violence and hatred among our own people. Dr. King, speaking prophetically 50 years ago, speaks to and witnesses that evil of militarism that is tied to the myth of redemptive violence. On this Memorial Day weekend, we remember, we honor, and we give thanks for those who have died serving their country. Yet let us, as Christians, as followers of Jesus on the way, be a people who are about that both and, who are willing to hold that tension, yes, of committing ourselves to giving thanks and honoring while we commit ourselves more deeply to being a people of peace. It is possible to hold that tension, to give thanks for those who serve their country and the brokenness of the way that militarism happens while still being a people of peace. We encounter this myth of redemptive violence whenever we talk about the need for a responsible way to end gun violence. Oh, we just need to arm our teachers. We just need to arm and have more security guards. We have seen evidence recently that this doesn't work, whether in Texas or in Florida. We hear that we will just bomb Syria to teach them about not poisoning their own people. Yet tragically, we see this myth, and might we be bold enough to call it a lie of redemptive violence, is woven into the fabric of our society. It goes back at least to 1250 BCE with the Babylonian creation story of the Anima Elish. And we have children's ears, so I will just get to the point of that creation story. We have gods fighting, right? Tiamat and Apsu and Marduk. And Marduk has negotiated a steep price. If he is able to take out Mother God Tiamat, then he should be given undisputed power in the assembly of gods. So I will spare us the blood and the gore that happens to Mother Tiamat, so that at the end, Marduk then stretches out her corpse full length and from it creates all of the cosmos. A creation story that is just riddled with violence and blood and gore that we continue to encounter in our TV shows and our Hollywood movies. Anyone else struggling with their kids about Xbox and Fortnite and how long they can play that game? It's perpetual. If we wonder where the misogynistic roots may have begun, we can look to this Babylonian myth as well. In creation, we hear in this as an act of violence, which is why the biblical Genesis creation story is so powerful in its peace-giving, so powerful in its collaboration. In the beginning, we hear God created with breath. We hear God creates with voice and this loving energy. And through that, God creates female and male. There is no violence. There is no gore. Instead, there's mutuality and peace-giving and expansive nature of that loving energy. The Jewish folks gave voice to this other way of creation happening while they were in captivity in Babylon. This beautiful Genesis poetry speaks to a God who is loving and good and creates a good creation. It's this countercultural image that we can continue to lift up in the face of a myth of redemptive violence that tells us that victory of order can only happen by means of violence. We live in a time where it seems as if there is this theater of perpetual conflict with the prize going to the strong. We hear that the only way we can have peace is through war. We hear we can only have security through strength. And these are these core convictions. Y'all still with me? We're getting to the hope, yes? Just naming what we've been swimming around in. Yet redemptive violence, we know, does not lead to liberation. Militarism does not liberate. Violence does not liberate or save. It only destroys short-term and long-term. And Jesus, in the face of this, who knew about violence and he knew about militarism even in his own time, continued to challenge it. He continued to challenge militarism. He continued to challenge this myth of redemptive violence by the very way he lived his life. His life bore witness to the power of redemptive love. Love that disrupts suffering, love that stands with those in need, love that is redemptive and is with those who have been forgotten and marginalized and abused. By his very life and his death and his resurrection, Jesus stood with those and asks us to do the same. To stand against the systemic sins of poverty and racism and militarism that attempt day in and day out to demoralize us, to deflate us, to deter us from loving our God with our entire being and then going out and loving our neighbor as the same. What we would want for our very selves, we would want for our neighbors, whether they're sitting next to us in the pew or the community around us or the world in which we live. In this interaction with Nicodemus, we see a Jesus who teaches a third way where Jesus abhors both passivity and violence. He teaches us a new way forward that's neither submissive nor assaults. It's neither about fighting or flight. He shows us a way to oppose evil without mirroring it, where oppressors can be resisted without being neutralized, without being destroyed. And he grounds it all in pointing us towards a God who says, I love the entire world. Instead of there being violence, Jesus points us towards this God of love. Jesus points us to a God who asks us, who invites us to be born anew out of death-dealing violence and into liberative practices of healing. Jesus points us to a God who asks us to participate in the transformation of systemic evils, to be born into God's dream here on earth now of liberation and of peace. Peace that's within us and peace that is flowing outside of us into our very communities and our world. So we ask, O God, with your help, may it be so through our very words and our actions. Amen.